State Senator
Recording in
from District
progress.
34. And we're going to be asking some questions and hopefully get some very informative answers from the Senator. So we'll start out with the first question. Senator Umberg, first of all, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate that very much. I know your schedule is heavily impacted these days. So would you give us kind of an overview of the issues and concerns that you're focusing on as the state works to emerge from the pandemic?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. Local elected leaders, Mayor Pete, Mayor Kalmick, have really stepped up to the plate here in the last 15 or 16 months. And I don't need to tell you how challenging it is trying to make sure that your communities are healthy, both physically healthy and economically healthy. And I know both of you have been doing a really excellent job. Fortunately, you get paid quite a bit. I'm being a bit sarcastic here because it's God and country that basically you're doing this for and for your communities. And so I'm grateful to you. In terms of what we're doing, my guess is that our priorities are similar to your priorities. The first priority of all of us in government is to maintain the health of our communities. And so the COVID pandemic is something that is either the backdrop or the overlay to virtually everything we've done here in the last 14 months. Trying to keep people healthy, trying to deal with those who are sick, trying to deal with the economic consequences. Those are all front and center. In terms of my contribution, I have certain discrete responsibilities in the Senate. I chaired the Elections Committee prior to now chairing the Judiciary Committee. And as chair of the Elections Committee, my job was to make sure that we could have an election in California that was safe and allowed as many people who are eligible to vote have the opportunity to vote in a safe way, and keeping the employees safe. And so that was a focus of if you're asking about my personal focus, that was a focus here for the first couple of years, was making sure that we could do that. And I think we did. We had a very, very successful election in terms of the turnout last November 2020, and in terms of keeping people safe. And those were our goals. That continues for this year. We're going to have an election this year that's going to be conducted sometime in the fall. And our challenges, my personal challenge, was to make sure that was an election that was both safe and allowed as many people to vote who were eligible to vote and wanted to vote to be able to do so. So that's number one. Number two is now I chair Judiciary Committee. Judiciary Committee has responsibility for making sure that folks have access to justice, so that whether it's a criminal matter or whether it's a civil matter, or whether it's a family law matter or a domestic matter, that the people, even during times of pandemic, need to have access to justice. And so that's one of my responsibilities, making sure the courts run as efficiently as is possible, that they have the resources to do so, and they have the tools to do so. And, I'd be happy to talk about this a little later, that I'm very concerned about the cost of litigation and starting to reduce the cost of litigation. I think I've got somebody helping me out here. I don't know if, there we go. So the other issues that we're dealing with, the economic reverberations from the pandemic. All of us, especially in this portion of Orange County, are impacted, for example, by the closure of Disneyland. The second and third order impacts are immense. And I've had people say, well, we've got some people that are unemployed. It's not just some people who work at Disneyland that were unemployed. It's all the businesses that are dependent upon Disneyland: hotels, restaurants, travel agencies, all sorts of second and third order impacts. I have my own bill that simply says that if you're a business that couldn't operate during the pandemic, that you shouldn't have to pay certain governmental fees. If you're a restaurant and a bar, you shouldn't have to pay your ABC license fee if you're not operational. That's one of our contributions. The other contribution is providing rental assistance both to tenants, but also to make sure that landlords are also able to pay their mortgage during the pandemic. And so that's been another focus of the legislature and a focus for my personal sort of activity. I'm sure we're going to discuss housing at some point. Housing crisis is unabated in California, that the cost of housing is astronomical. Those of us who've been here for a long time may, we are fortunate, but our children are not so fortunate. I have, one of my 3 children just had a baby here a month ago, and they would desperately like to buy a house and can't do so. So that is a big issue, and not just for people who wish to buy homes, also for people who wish to rent. We're going to face, when the eviction moratorium expires, both in the courts as well as economically, in terms of housing, we're going to face a more acute situation here relatively soon. So having said all that, I look at the numbers, and Mayor Pete and Mayor Kalmick, maybe you do every day. I see there are only 7 people in ICU today in Orange County. That is fantastic as compared to several months ago where we had 2,500 people who were hospitalized, and 30 times the number of people are in ICU right now. So we are, if people continue to take adequate precaution, just use common sense, and people get vaccinated, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel here. Praise the Lord. So anyway, those are that's sort of a survey course of what's going on.
Good.
Perfect.
Thank you. John, you had a question.
Yes, and congratulations on your new grandbaby. It's an exciting phase of life.
By the way, we have in the last, I understand that there's a decline in births during the pandemic, and that will have impacts on terms of schools later on. But the Umberg family has done its part, because in the last 5 months, we've had 3 grandbabies. So.
Oh my goodness.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Your next question we'd have is, you're a senior member of the state delegation in Orange County, and Orange County is a mix of both Democrat and Republican leaders. And so how is your working relationship with the local leaders in this area?
Well, this is my 3rd stint in the legislature, so I guess by dint of years and color of hair, that makes me senior. I was first elected in 1990. Many of your listeners and viewers probably weren't alive in 1990, and then have had significant breaks in service, a 10-year break and a 12-year break. This is my third stint in the legislature, first time in the state Senate. I try to work hard to maintain relationships. I'm hoping that Mayor Kalmick feels like he's got an open door to our office and to me.
Yes.
I know that some cities think they need to hire lobbyists to come and advocate for them. I'm hopeful that there are 9 cities that I represent, that they don't feel the need necessarily to hire lobbyists, that they can knock on my door, call my cell phone at any time. So I take that responsibility of staying in touch very, very seriously with the local elected officials. You folks are where the rubber meets the road. You're going to hear about the concerns earlier than I am, and they're going to become more acute earlier in your world. And I realize that stop signs and potholes aren't the first thing that we're responsible for, but I want to hear about that. When you have an issue, a local issue that I can help remedy, I want to hear about it, and so I try to stay in close touch. In terms of the other members of the delegation, you're right, Mayor Pete. We have a broad mix. When I was first elected in 1990, I was the only Democrat at any level, supervisor, congressional, legislative level. And so things are very different now. But unlike Washington, D.C., where I think things are more polarized, in the House of Representatives, there are 435 of them. I'm in a House where there's only 40 people. And so we come into contact with one another all the time, particularly when there's no pandemic. We sit next to one another on the floor. We sit next to one another in committees all the time. And so the personal animus, I think, doesn't exist like it may other places in government. We have, in terms of the state Senate, Senator Min to my south and Senator Newman to my east. I see them, I went out to dinner with them the night before last. I see them all the time. And the same thing with for example, Senator Bates. I fly back and forth with Senator Bates and we talk all the time. Members of the Assembly, we see one another quite often. If you're on the early morning flight on Monday morning or the late afternoon flight on Thursday, you'll see about 10 legislators on that plane. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Senator, many of the rules and guidelines during the COVID pandemic have come directly from the governor's office, governor himself. We saw in recent news that he's chosen not to lift the emergency order so that the governor will likely continue with these policies. Can you give us, from your level, some insight into how that works? And are you able to talk to the governor directly to make sure that your constituents down here are represented?
Well, there's the founders, both in Washington and California. They created the different branches of government to be checks and balances on one another. So there is a healthy dialogue and sometimes a healthy tension between the branches of government. I don't hang out with the governor, but I talk to him
Okay.
periodically. The issue of how to deal with an emergency, and I've been around for different emergencies, whether it was the earthquake, the Northridge earthquake, and other different fires and different emergencies. You do need someone in charge who can make decisions relatively quickly, and we have that. I am very hopeful that as the pandemic recedes and as Californians get vaccinated and our communities get healthy, that emergency order will not be required for all that very much longer. But we are still in a state of emergency. There are still counties, unlike Orange County, who are still really struggling with the pandemic, and our economy is still struggling. So this is a good question for a political science class as to what that relationship is. We are currently working on a budget with the governor right now. We have some differences of opinion. We will come together here, I think by next Monday, on a budget that we all can, or at least the majority of us can agree upon.
Great, thank you.
I do think, by the way, back to your question at the beginning, I do take concerns to the governor, and one of the things that I have emphasized to the governor, and maybe this is a function of the fact that when I was first in the Assembly as the only Democrat, and I felt like Orange County was not treated fairly, is that I am in his ear often about making sure that there is that we are treated fairly. We are treated on an equal basis with other regions of the state, and that's part of my job.
Great.
Thank you. Kind of a tangential question that you mentioned, the vaccinations. Could you give us an update on how things are going across the state? We talked briefly that our Orange County counts are way down and things are looking very good here in the county. But how are things going around the rest of the state?
In general, things are going well. There are some regions of the state where it's not going nearly as well. We're all facing an issue. I also have a business. We're all facing issues as to opening businesses, and those who are vaccinated, those who are not vaccinated, those who refuse to get vaccinated, those who can't be vaccinated. And I personally believe that everyone, except for the very, very, very tiny few who medically or perhaps because of a religious issue can't be vaccinated, but that everybody should get vaccinated. It's not an issue just for their own personal safety. It's an issue for my safety, for my kids' safety, and for your safety. And I am supportive of the governor's efforts to, and our efforts and your efforts to encourage everyone to be vaccinated. We've had our own vaccination clinics that our office has sponsored. I know you've had vaccination opportunities in your cities. It's absolutely imperative, and sadly there have been places in Orange County which have disseminated misinformation about both the pandemic as well as vaccinations, and that's harmful, I think, to all of us. There's this issue concerning whoever coined the term vaccine passport. I would really like to talk to, because that's done a great disservice to the effort. There's that attaches a moniker to the ability for businesses, including my own, to be able to verify whether people have been vaccinated or not. And it's not designed, the verification of vaccination is not designed to somehow create two classes of citizens. It's designed to be able to have our economy, our schools, our government function efficiently and safely.
Great. Thank you.
Well, so to kind of follow up on that, Senator, do you think that we do need some form of to where someone can demonstrate the fact that they have been vaccinated?
I think, again, I'll just go back to my business experience. Yes, we have strongly encouraged, both in government, in my government job as well as my business job, strongly encourage people to be vaccinated. There is an issue. I realize that it's not completely resolved as to whether an employer can require employees to be vaccinated. But I think that having an employer have the ability to be able to identify those who are and are not vaccinated, I think that's important. And the ability to do so is dependent upon, either having a vaccination card or some other mechanism to demonstrate that person has been vaccinated.
Great, thank you. John?
Yes. As the state emerges from the pandemic shutdown and we try to reinvigorate our economies, what resources will the state be able to bring to bear to help businesses reopen, especially small businesses like yours that have really been struggling?
Well, so and if folks have not taken the opportunity to apply for various federal and state loans, they should do so. Some can be forgiven, depending upon whether you've maintained your workforce during the pandemic or not. I think Joe Kalmick raised the issue of businesses being able to open safely and being assured that they can do so with some sort of proof of vaccination. Government providing some opportunity to provide employers that assurance is really important. I think also as things become less restrictive, is making sure that people clearly understand what the rules of the road are. I think all those things are really important. One of the things that has been really inspiring to me, and I bet it's the same for the two of you as well, is to see so many businesses that really stepped up during the pandemic. I mean, some businesses, restaurants, for example, that had to shut down but would reopen, periodically to be able to feed people that with their volunteers, their employees who now are no longer working, coming back to volunteer to provide food distribution, with other businesses changing their business from manufacturing alcohol to manufacturing hand sanitizers, other businesses that have done the very best they can to maintain their workforce while taking a hit to their bottom line. I mean, I am really moved by so many businesses that have done that, and those businesses should be rewarded. Now, there's a very, very small number of businesses, and I'll underline very small number, who have, for whatever reason, decided to thumb their nose at the pandemic. Businesses that advertise, you may not wear a mask in our business. Businesses that have said, you may not socially distance, as some sort of a political statement. Sadly, they've gotten a lot of attention, and those folks shouldn't get rewarded here as we emerge from the pandemic.
Okay. As the co-chair of the Pandemic Recovery Committee, what resources, more specifically, do you think the state, can bring to bear here to help the residents and the businesses recover?
Yeah, you may have just promoted me there, Joe. I'm not co-chair. I think I'm a member of the committee. So the current co-chairs would take offense at that. So there are, and by the way, if we haven't posted it, we should post our phone number and the way to get a hold of our office. But as I mentioned before, there are loans and other resources provided to businesses to keep them operational. There's rental assistance, and there's also the rental assistance has two benefits. One, it's a benefit to landlords. I am, most landlords aren't don't own and operate 1,000-unit operation. Most landlords have maybe 4 units or 3 units or 2 units, and I am mindful of the fact that if landlord, if the tenants aren't paying rent, they can't pay their mortgage, and that has some dramatic implications for them personally and for our economy generally. And so there are a lot of folks that are not taking advantage of the rental assistance program. I'm not quite sure why. I don't know if it's too complicated or not. One of the things that is an embarrassment to those of us in state government in particular, but I think in government in general, is the EDD. If you've been unemployed and trying to seek, your rightful benefit, unemployment benefits, that absolutely has to be remedied. I have my own concerns about its functionality, but I also have some of my own concerns about the amount of fraud that ensued. And I've authored a bill for us to be able to take a look at restitution, going after those who have defrauded the taxpayers and seeing what we can do to recover that. I know that lots of that money is gone, but even if we only recover 10%, that may be as much as $4 or $5 billion, and $4 or $5 billion is actual money. So.
You mentioned as in your opening comments some of the things that the state, that you're considering about taxation of businesses or not taxing businesses, say for their ABC license fee or things like that. Are there any additional items you'd like to highlight that the state will be, looking at to help businesses?
So, well, you raised the issue of taxes. I realize that some of my colleagues have proposed additional taxes. For me, that's a non-starter for a bunch of reasons. One is that when we're trying to get the economy back on its feet, that is not the time to further tax either individuals or businesses, number one. Number two is that contrary to our expectations a year ago, based on a number of different things. The fact that high income earners haven't really suffered all that much during the pandemic, and we're heavily dependent on high income earners in California for our revenue. And we've been the beneficiaries of federal support that we don't need to raise taxes. There's an argument about how much money we've received for the federal government and how much money we've collected in terms of tax revenues. There's an argument about that, but there's no argument that's much greater than we expected a year ago. And so now is the time for us to allow entrepreneurs, to allow businesses to the extent that they are recovering, to reinvest back in their business, not to tax them any greater amount than they're already being taxed.
On another subject, the reopening of schools. This is going to be very critical for this year for so many reasons. Many of the schools are still operating, virtually. And, it's very fractious. I mean, in terms of one school district wants to be, totally back in business, and others are hesitating. Is there anything, in the Senate going on that would help to ensure that all the schools are ready to be able to reopen in the fall? And then is there any plan that you know of, or how are we going to deal with the disparities between the education that has been offered during the pandemic? How do we realign so all of our students are going to be at the same basic level overall?
Yeah. There are some issues that are really, really difficult. And this is an issue that's really, really difficult and really, really important. I am blessed with a great deal of diversity in the district I represent. Goes from Santa Ana, Garden Grove, Anaheim, all the way through Seal Beach, Fountain Valley, Westminster, Huntington Beach, up into Long Beach. And so there's disparity, and there's a difference between both majority ethnicity as well as wealth. And school districts have, as you point out, adopted different models. We, just as I've been inspired by local leaders like you guys stepping up to the plate, I've been inspired by school teachers, administrators, board members in large part. There are always exceptions to that rule who have done the very best they can. I personally, and as you may know, that there's a huge incentive to reopen as of April 15th. There's an incentive for schools to reopen. The state provides, I've forgotten the exact amount of money to each school district proportionate to the number of students, but a huge amount of money to incentivize schools to reopen as of April 15th. Some school districts have not done that. This is my own personal point of view, is I believe that schools can open safely with appropriate precautions, that schools, with hand washing and masks and vaccinations and those kinds of things, especially now that 12-year-olds and above can get vaccinated, that they can reopen, and that they in fact should reopen. And I'm doing what I can to encourage them to do so. We have learned some lessons here in the pandemic. Special ed is really hard to be able to do remotely, and I have tremendous sympathy for parents who are trying to address the needs of children who are traditionally in special ed, because it's almost impossible to do remotely. The issues of socialization for young people, very important. I know I mentioned my grandchildren, and we all draw from our own personal experience. I have a 11-year-old granddaughter who's in 5th grade. Her mother, because of some medical issues, they've had to be really, really, really careful during the pandemic. And so she has not been able to see other kids here for a year. really. And so when we invited her, as we've done before, to come down to Orange County, live in the Bay Area for a couple of weeks and bring a friend, and she's done that before. And I said, Ellie, you got to come back down to Orange County, come back to our, Orange County for a couple of weeks. And I said, bring a friend. She said, Opa, I don't have any friends. And that, that's like a spear through a parent or grandparent's heart, and is a consequence of what's going on. So back to your question about opening schools, it's my personal point of view that we can do so. We can do so safely, that we've learned some lessons about socialization. We've learned some lessons about special ed. We've learned some lessons about remote learning. We've learned some valuable lessons that certain things can be done more efficiently remotely, and that we can draw upon resources that we might not otherwise have access to if we use remote learning. We've learned that, there are a lot of people that don't have internet connection. Most school districts have done a good job with hardware. We've learned that there are a tremendous number of students that are on free and reduced price breakfasts and lunches, and that, when you close down schools, that there's food insecurity that has to be dealt with. If that's your primary point of sustenance for some school kids, and the school closes down, that's a big issue. And luckily, school districts have been very innovative and ingenious in addressing that. But anyway, I'm sorry for such a long-winded answer, but this is a huge question that I know all of us, whether you're on city council or whether you're in the state legislature, or you're on a school board, it's of concern to everybody.
Definitely.
Yes, my wife is the president of the Cypress Elementary District, so we live this every day.
Oh, yes, you do. Well, you have to thank her too from our perspective. Yeah.
Will do. Thank you. I'm going to skip the question we had on EDD because you've already addressed ADD. I'm going to move to the aerospace and defense question because I retired from 30 years at Raytheon a couple of years ago, and would ask, what is the Aerospace and Defense Committee doing, as we see companies choosing to relocate operations? What are we doing to keep that great industry here in Southern California or in California in general?
Well, thank you, Mayor. Offline, we'll have to do a who you know. My brother-in-law is a 25-year employee, and my nephew is a 3-year employee of Raytheon. Okay. So, so one of the big challenges is Boeing. Boeing is an employer, was a much larger employer of our local workforce here, and whether it is using our own personal initiative to keep Boeing here, one of the challenges with entities like Raytheon or Boeing is housing prices. That it is really hard if you have a facility in Seal Beach or in Huntington Beach, and you have employees that are, you have employees that make $70,000 a year, they can't find a house. They're living in the Inland Empire, and then they find other employment. So that is a huge issue, number one. Number two is making sure that to the extent that businesses want to expand their footprint, that we not impose extraordinary burdens upon them. We want to make sure that we're all environmentally sensitive, but that CEQA doesn't become a huge impediment to businesses that want to expand their footprint. That applies to housing in some respects as well. So those are some of the things, whether or not we provide some sort of state incentives for businesses to stay here. That's a question that is before us, and how we provide those incentives and those kinds of things. I mean, one of the benefits that we have is that, you represent beautiful areas, and I came to California from the Midwest, and I can't imagine wanting to move back to the Midwest, and that we do have wonderful climate and geography here, which will remain. We just have to make sure that we don't make it too difficult to do business here, so that we that we lose the economic edge that we have.
Thank you.
Back to a COVID related question. You know, in recent reports, there have been basically zero COVID related deaths, depending on the day in Orange County. And so, could we at this point declare the pandemic to be largely over? And what do you see as the long-term changes that are going to be permanent as a result of the pandemic in terms of how we live and how we conduct business and so forth?
So you're right, and as I mentioned earlier, I check the COVID numbers every day. I think there are 7 in ICU today, which is the lowest we've had probably in a year. And credit goes to lots and lots of folks. The healthcare officials, both governmental and non-governmental healthcare officials, have really done an excellent job under difficult circumstances. Even though we're at record low numbers in Orange County, we're opening Disneyland, so we're gonna have visitors coming from other places. We've got wonderful beaches, so we attract folks coming from other areas. So we can't quite declare victory quite yet. We need to still be mindful, and I am concerned that if people believe that somehow, hey, I don't need to get vaccinated, it looks like everything's resolved, that's a big problem. So keeping our eye on the ball, number one. What did we learn in the pandemic? Well, we've learned that some of our systems don't work as well as they need to. Some of our healthcare systems don't work as well as they need to in a crisis, and we got to learn from that. We got to learn from the shortage of PPE at the beginning of the crisis. We got to learn from the ability to work remotely. All of us are on Zoom right now. This is actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
I am a little zoomed out from Zoom meetings. You're probably zoomed out as well. But I mean, here we are. I'm sitting in the Capitol in Sacramento. You're in Orange County. We're talking to lots of people. Traditionally, we would do this, at a function in Cypress or a function in Seal Beach. And so this is a learning experience, allows us to touch base with lots more people and communicate lots more effectively. So that's a plus. People have learned to work at home. Even though I'm only 39 years old, that I'm actually, again, being a little sarcastic, only a little bit sarcastic, that I'm not I'm used to working in an office. I'm used to working in a workspace. I have difficulty focusing if I'm not in a workspace, but apparently lots of millennials don't have that same difficulty. Lots of younger people don't have that same difficulty and can be equally as productive at home, maybe even more productive at home than they can be in an office. And so, we're in my own business where we just expanded, just got a bunch of additional office space that now I look, and although we have employees, if they came in, they could fill those offices. They're not, and they probably won't come in as often, but they seem to be just as productive. So those are some of the things that we've learned, and I think some of the things that will be permanent. We'll see what happens to the commercial real estate market here in Orange County. I don't know. I'm curious as to what you guys think. What do you think the permanent changes? What have you experienced both in government and in private sector?
Well, from my perspective, I mean, the most obvious permanent changes are the ability to work remotely and to meet remotely. And I think that as we go back to, in your own case, you see that you don't necessarily have a need to have new employees necessarily working either at all or some of the time, at an office. And I think that we'll wind up with kind of a hybrid system for government meetings. I mean, yes, we very much want to go back to having open city council meetings where the public can actually be there. Many who feel uncomfortable working in a Zoom situation or emailing, their questions and so forth. So I think that, but having, instead of a group, whether it's a SCAG, meeting or a council of mayors, instead of having to drive, some people are going to have to drive many miles, and with the ever congestion, mounting congestion, they're going to have to leave an hour and a half to get to a meeting that's an hour, when all we have to do is, put a sport coat and a suit over my Bermuda shorts, and and are part of a formalized meeting. In terms of the restaurant industry, I think we'll see hygienic changes. We may find that servers will be wearing gloves. I mean, anything that along that line, and I think will be permanent.
Yeah, we're seeing in our business park a real increase in demand for storage, warehousing space, and much less demand for office space, as you mentioned. So we're going to be looking at our zoning codes for our business parks to see if we can accommodate, increasing the use of those spaces for the businesses that really want to be there.
Yeah, you had asked about some other lessons learned. One of the things, I'm carrying a bill that is really a product of the pandemic to allow folks to buy and lease cars electronically, so you don't have to go into the dealership. Personally, I think that may be a benefit. You can sit and look at the contract, in the sort of the confines of your home, take as long as you want to sort of mull over whether you actually want, additional, fill in the blank. But you can't do that right now. You can't buy a car with electronic, signatures, electronic document transmission, which is, the pandemic highlights why we need to modernize that process. I mentioned at the outset, I chair the Judiciary Committee, and one of my professions is being a lawyer. And those of you who have been in court or been around courts, it's a very inefficient process, very, very inefficient, and as a consequence, very expensive. And so I have a bill that allows some witnesses to testify remotely. So you don't have to sit in the hallway for a day and a half waiting to testify. And so you don't have to miss work waiting to testify. That's somewhat controversial bill, but it is, again, a product of a lesson we learned during the pandemic, that everybody doesn't need to necessarily testify in a live setting. I have a bill that says that courts have to send out notices electronically. There are some courts in California that still mail everything. Now, that seems crazy, but it is. So these are lessons we've learned during the pandemic, is that we have to do certain things more efficiently, and we have the infrastructure to do it. We have the infrastructure to have, for example, every court deliver notices electronically, or we should if we don't. And we have the infrastructure to have some witnesses at least, testify remotely. Again, lessons learned.
Senator, we greatly appreciate your time. We've reached the end of the time that we've scheduled. I'm sure we have more questions we'd love to discuss, but want to respect the time, and thank you again for spending time with us today, answering some of these questions. And I just want to remind everybody that we have a vaccination clinic on Tuesday, June 16th, here at the Los Alamitos Race Course, and then again on Tuesday, July 6th, there will be another clinic. So anyone can show up. You can come as you are, as long as there are supplies, or you can schedule an appointment through the Athena.com system.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for doing your part during the pandemic. I'll conclude where I began by saying that you inspire me, you inspire us to do our jobs better because of your dedication. So thanks so much.
All right.
Thanks for telling.
All right.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
You bet. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.